Hey guys, and welcome back to it now for something a little bit different. Guys, again, this week I am kind enough to John Nance here is welcome back to join me. He was kind enough to come back, and we're going to talk a little bit more 1960s sci-fi. John, welcome back, buddy. Good to see you.
Hey, good seeing you. Thank you for having me back. It's
Absolutely.
always fun.
Always a
Absolutely.
pleasure, brother. And do you know what episode this is?
Is it 69?
And I was actually very tempted to after I realized it was episode 69, I was very tempted to say, "Hey, we're going to go cover Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure." To further enhance the corny joke, I said, "You know what? No, I'm gonna be mature for once in my life. I committed to Fahrenheit 451, 1966, so that's what we're talking about. We're going to celebrate our my 69th episode to talk about the 1966 Francis Truffaut um, sci-fi classic. This is an interesting piece I'm going to get into a little bit later on, but just right off the get-go, it's interesting because this is his first and only film in English. It was also a very troubled production, from what I understand. I found some research. It was a very troubled production, which again I'll get into. But before you do all that, what have you been up to? What have you been consuming? Reading anything good? Watching anything good?
So, watching something good. Yeah. So, went to go catch Mission Impossible 8 Dead Reckoning
Nice.
in IMAX.
Oh,
And
Netflix too. I'm
yeah.
jealous.
Oh yeah, and then in Dolby Atmos, that one, that movie was awesome. That movie it tied it up nicely. Man, there's just still some shots. I think I figured out most of them, but there's just some shots in there. I'm like, holy crap! I got to see it again to try and figure it out. So saw it on a Thursday night. And then
Nice.
went on a Friday morning to hang out with our birthday buddy Troy, and saw
Cool.
it again. Saw it again. And outside of that, I don't know why,
Mhm.
but it's like we went, wife and I, we try to watch shows, right? That's kind of like our time together, right? And recently we started watching Resident Alien. Holy crap, how did I miss that? That show's hilarious.
Man,
Alan
it's
Tudyk.
got my
Oh,
man Alan Tudyk in it. You can never go wrong with Mr. Alan Tudyk.
absolutely, absolutely. Outside of that, found some copies at a local comic book shop of my hero Bernie Wrightson. I just love his artwork. Loved him growing up. A couple of issues of his comics that I didn't have, which were Bernie Wrightson's Master of the Macabre. Uh, Got to sit down and picked up a couple new issues of the new Creep Show. I think by Dynamite, might be another company. I apologize. So yeah, I got some of that stuff to read. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for me. How about you?
Nice, nice, very cool. Well, let me comment on Mission Impossible. Now, I might offend Troy in a joking manner here, but there's no way our man Tom Cruise did that fucking stunt plane. I call bullshit.
Oh,
There's no way he was fucking jumping back and forth between those planes. I know he's got a hard on for Tom Cruise, and I love Tom Cruise too, but he might love him a
but
little more.
now, so
That
that
was
was one.
crazy, dude.
It was nuts, and that was one of the scenes. That was one of the scenes that I had to figure out how did he do it, because that was him that jumped off the biplane. I was looking for the telltale signs of CGI, right, and I couldn't find it. And then it was on the second showing did I catch something where before they would show like the bolts of the support struts, and they were all like aluminum, silver, stainless steel bolts. But in
Mhm.
that final scene, they show a shot where there's like black squares over where those joints were. So I'm like, okay. So what he did was they timed it, and as they timed it, they squibbed it to shear the nuts so the plane wing could fly off backwards. So I was like, that's my guess. But the only CGI part was oh god. Cy Morales, when his death scene, I was like, oh man, they CGI'd that. That sucks so bad. But yeah, that movie. Well, you mentioned offending Troy. It was
Yeah, no, I always
because
like to bust his ball. So I think one time I think
oh
I,
yeah,
I joked about his best performance was him, and I shared on his page the clip of him jumping up and down on the couch on Oprah.
with Oprah, yeah, yeah. After the
Because I know, listen, I love Billy Crudup. He's my favorite actor, probably like modern actor, and I know
yeah,
people probably give me shit about that. But it's an ongoing joke at this point. I always bust his balls about his love for Tom Cruise.
oh yeah,
That's why I always
yeah,
like
that came into mind because like at the end of the movie, right? He's just like he finally like looks over to me like, "What did you think?" So I just looked at him like, "Man, this was this movie freaking sucked.
Heart attack, right?
He had a heart attack, got ready to
What are you
fight, and I
talking
was like,
about?
I'm just
Damn
kidding.
it.
But it wasn't just him. It was like several other people in the movie because I said it loud enough, like damn near everybody could hear it. Like several other folks in the theater just stopped and turned around, looked at me, and I was like, I'm just kidding. This movie was freaking awesome.
The weird, okay, so a couple things I want to touch on in this conversation right here. One thing, surprisingly enough, a lot of people did love this film. I thought the film was pretty good, but I will say this much. I have heard from a handful of people that they think it was great, but perhaps the lesser of part one in comparison to part one. I've heard some ramblings about that. Personally, I think it's pretty equal in my opinion. I don't really see that much of a disparity in as far as storytelling, ambition, and what they were trying to do, trying to have to
Yeah.
close out the franchise in a way that's meaningful. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's a culmination. You can argue, yeah, you could argue both points. The last one, my argument was, they should have never killed off Rebecca Ferguson, right? Ilsa Faust. I thought her character was amazing, but yeah, each has its weak moments, right? But when you look at the totality of the run, dude, it's like what, freaking 30 years of this franchise.
Yeah, no,
Right? From where it started, like over the topness to really, close out the way it did. I thought, what a way to go out. But, a little spoiler alert, it's kind of crazy how they left the door open. You know what I mean? At the very end. They didn't say this is it, but Tom Cruise says, yeah, this is my last one. Right. Okay, Tom, for you it probably is, but who knows?
from what I've heard from ramblings, I heard it was the studio that didn't want to continue the franchise with him, not because of, I think it was because the previous film underperformed. Like I think it might have broken even I mean, again, sort of
Yeah.
numbers guys, so they might know that, but I believe it might have just hit their target number. But I also think part of it might just be the simple fact that while Tom Cruise is great with stunts, he's not probably on the same level as Jackie Chan. Some people might argue it. And it might be just simply an insurance thing, like what I could see potentially happening. I could see them like 3, 4, 5 years, having them do another one. In this time and place, maybe he's more of like the mentorship character, like
Right.
mentoring like a younger team. And he's still there, like being the tactical guy and probably doing more stuff that he should be stunt wise. But I could see him like taking on more of the mentor role and having the team kind of work with him and having like a young upstart actor
Yeah.
kind of taking on the big intense moments and having him more of like a strong supporting character. That's I could definitely see something like that happening.
Yeah, it's got to be. I mean, to ensure him doing his own stunts, some of the craziness that he does, he's up there with Jackie Chan. But I'm sorry, Jackie Chan, he'll always be number one, simply because how many times did he almost die making his movies? Whereas, Tom Cruise might have got hurt once in a while, but I think
All
nothing
you
to
got
the
to do
level
is
of
look
Jackie
at Rumble in the Bronx and see the credit scene. It's Rumble in Bronx where they see all the times he fucked himself up.
Yeah,
And that's just
it's
one movie. A
nuts.
lot of his movies they show you like all the times he did one take after another, and you see him getting hurt over and over
Oh
again.
yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah,
So that's one thing I want to comment. The other thing, and this is again, this is gossip more than anything, but from what I understand from an industry and someone working in industry for many, many years, there have been rumors that whilst Tom does do a lot of his stunts, supposedly there have been rumblings that perhaps maybe somebody else might be assisting to some degree. Now, the word assisting goes a long way, and
yeah,
that could be part of the stunt and then cutting to Tom in the middle of the stunt, or it could mean something completely different. Again, that's just
yeah.
gossip. So
No, I
don't
mean,
take that
yeah,
anything with a grain of salt. But
yeah. I mean, I know that there are just some scenes where he might be leading up to the shot, but the actual
yeah,
shot itself, they will do
yeah,
a body double simply because I don't care how much you're insured, but you're not the guy without you, there's no rest of the movie, but
yeah,
stunt doubles, and I'm not trying to say this in a demeaning
yeah,
way,
yeah,
but that's part of the stunt double's job. I mean, the movie Fall Guy kind of shows that, right? It's one of those that some of his stunts, jumping off the mountain and parachuting, risk level, moderate. I get it.
yeah.
But maybe jumping into a building where literally it's going to explode behind you. Yeah, we might have to do a little something different, but yeah.
Yeah, I look at like the one that everyone always talks about, and obviously it's not on the same level by any means. But if you look at Fast Seven, he died,
Yeah.
and luckily they had obviously they use a lot of CGI, so it's not this.
Yeah.
It's hard to make this comparison and be an honest comparison because they do use a lot of CGI. They got lucky because they had actually gotten all the dialogue scenes, and all they had to do was filling in with a stunt guy, and it was his brother, so it already looked
Right.
kind of like him,
Right.
and they
Paul's
were able
brother.
to
Yeah.
cheat.
Yeah.
But they got lucky because A, they had somebody that looked almost exactly like him,
Yeah.
and B, they do rely on a lot of CGI in their
Yeah.
stunts. They were able to cheat. Mind you, now the quality level on those films and these films are completely different.
Yeah.
Not to say that I don't watch all the movies in the Fast franchise, even the really horrible ones, which seem
Yeah.
to be like almost every fucking movie for the last movie since probably movie five. They've all been
Yeah.
continually like a jump down in quality, but that's nor here nor there. So over the weekend, I got a chance to watch, speaking of movies that kind of touch back to the original, I watched the Karate Kids Legends movie. And that was an interesting film. All right. This movie, this Karate Kids Legends is basically a dial back to the original film, the very first film. It has very much, the underdog. We have a young guy, Ben Wang, who's the actor, he's an up and comer. He's a guy in China, living with his grandfather, who, of course, is Jackie Chan. Jackie Chan runs this little, I guess, dojo. I never saw the one where he was in with Will Smith's son, Jaden Smith, I guess.
Oh yeah. The
I never
Karate
caught
Kid.
that one.
Yeah.
But so he's in China, and his mom has to move to New York for a new job. Effectively, he gets there shortly after he's there. He ends up being put in a scenario where he's bullied. So again, dialing back to the first film, he meets a young girl played by what's this girl named Sadie Stanley, who plays a character named Mia LaPerry. She's I know her from the Goldbergs. If anyone's ever seen that show, it's a
Yeah.
pretty dumb comedy, but it's a good comedy. She played like a supporting part there. So effectively, what ends up happening, he ends up getting bullied. Of course, the bully happens to be the local tough guy, the New York dojo. And throughout the movie, at first he's resisting the urge to fight. Spoiler: we find out his older brother got killed in China the year before when he was competing at a big event. He won the event, and afterwards he got jumped. Ben character, he was there with him, but unfortunately he froze. So ever since then, his mom has been overprotective. She doesn't want him fighting. She doesn't want him training. But when Ben's character moves to New York, he keeps on getting bullied. And the only way to do anything is to fight back. So he enters this tournament. And of course, at this point, Jackie Chan ends up coming back to New York to see his grandson and to see his daughter. Um, and then we effectively get Ralph Macchio in, and they both kind of train him. And of course, it's what you'd expect, the happy ending. Like I said, there's a lot of dial back to the very first film. It's not a bad film by any means. I think it's enjoyable. It's like the equivalent of a frozen pizza, right? Sometimes it's rainy and crappy out and you don't want to leave the house. You want something that's warm and satisfying, something that washes down with a cold beer. It's not a perfect movie, and it's not near the quality of the originals. But on the same token, excuse me, I can make words. It does fill you up, and it's not bad. The characters really are what keep this movie together. All the main characters are absolutely wonderful. They have good chemistry. Fortunately, the weak sauce in this ingredient, going back to my pizza analogy, is that unfortunately Ralph Macchio and Jackie Chan are probably only in this movie. Jackie Chan's probably in it about a half an hour. Ralph Macchio literally probably isn't in it for more than 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes. If I'm being honest, 15 to 20 minutes. So, it would have been nice to see more of that. You could kind of guess, especially with Macchio, they probably said, "Hey, you want to be in this Karate Kid movie?" And he probably said, "Hey, how much you paying me?"
Yeah. Right.
Especially after the success of Cobra Kai. And I feel like if they could have maybe possibly written both those characters a little bit more, I think it would have been a little bit of a stronger movie, and it probably kind of would have stood on its own 2 feet a little bit more. And unfortunately, because of that, again, it's still an enjoyable movie. If you have a movie pass or an AMC A-list pass or the Regal pass, and it doesn't really cost you anything effectively, go watch it in the big screens. Otherwise, I'd say you could probably wait for Netflix or Paramount Plus or Max or whoever's going to get this on streaming. So I'd say it's a soft recommendation on that one. So I did see that. Other than that, I figured we were going to talk about it anyway. I watched on HBO Max. I went back and did a rewatch of the remake of Fahrenheit 451. This is directed by a Mr. Ramir Barini, if I'm getting his name correct. Seems like he's done some music videos, some television. One standout film that he's done in his past is a film called 99 Homes, which also has Michael Shannon in it. and it also has Andrew Garfield, and that's an excellent film. I wasn't familiar with the rest of his filmography. In this cast, like I said, we have Michael Shannon. He's playing the role of Captain Beatty, and then we have Michael B. Jordan playing our main character, Guy Montag, and then we have Sophia Boutella, who's playing Clarice. Is this film worth watching? That's the big question. In my opinion, it's worth touching on, but I think the problem is it separates it so there's nothing wrong with doing a remake of a film. You want to be distinct enough to stand out, but on the same token, there are certain heartbeats that you have to capture, in my opinion. You don't want to steal it scene for scene. We've all seen the Psycho remake. You know, you don't want to do beat for beat, but there are things that you have to touch on to pay homage to the original source material. Unfortunately, this film suffers because it just takes off in so many different directions that stray away from the original novel and stray so far away from even the 1966 film that we're talking about today. And unfortunately, the problem I had with it overall, besides the fact that it strayed so far away from those two source materials, it just ended up being a little bit bland. It ended up being just another sci-fi film that you'd watch. And I think if you hadn't seen the original film or you hadn't read the book, you might be okay with it. But I think once you've tasted that fine meal and then you're going back to a frozen dinner, you're like, yeah, you can keep the frozen dinner. I'm going to
Yeah,
go for the gourmet shit, you know? But
exactly right.
that leads me, because I know we were going to talk about it anyway. What are your thoughts on the remake? I know you said you had the opportunity, right? And
Yeah, so yeah, I did watch that just for comparisons, primarily to the book, Ray Bradbury's for Fahrenheit 451 and the 1966 version, and it was interesting. And we'll get a little bit deeper into it about how the parallels of this particular movie really links up with today's times. And the biggest flaw of that movie is the character development because it's so gosh, it's like Legos, right? They had a brick here, brick here, and they just put it all together. Michael B. Jordan, you had him on one hand, like, oh, I'm the best, yeah. And then all of a sudden, it's like, I would like to read. I like books, and then it doesn't really get into it. Sophia Botella is just. It was hard to gauge her character. Why did you do the things you did?
yeah,
And why are you flipping back and forth? Michael Shannon, his character was interesting, but at the same time, the flaw in that is, with some spoilers, you're not supposed to have books in this movie version. You're not supposed to even have paper or pens, right? But he spends times
yeah,
writing little sayings. And it's like, so what's the genesis of that? At the same time, to finish the movie out with a little tracker bug getting attached to a starling of all things, and that's going to save humanity. What?
yeah,
But the most interesting part of that line, that movie, is the line that comes out of it towards the end, where Captain Beatty, Michael Shannon's character, basically says, do what you were trained to do, all you know how to do, burn. Right. Which again parallels that if people don't take time to read between the lines, find the truth of things, look, you're going to just do anything that, that's all you're understanding that was the right thing to do. That's all you know how to do. Right. Which is, it's a lemming society, if you will. But it was a pretty powerful line that kind of stood out for me through the entire film because, to your point, it was a bland movie. My wife had never seen it, so you know and I had not seen it until the other night. So
oh, okay. I didn't know you.
it was interesting for, again, as a first time watch. My wife was just like, and I apologize, Mr. Jordan, but my wife was like, and this is why I don't like Michael B. Jordan. I'm like, give him a chance.
You know,
Whereas I just had issues with the world building was fine, but it had its own paradoxes, right? You're not supposed to read or write, but you can semi read and use emojis.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
what?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
it's like, a little bit more coherent. So bottom line was, it's a movie that I think suffers from some self-inflicted wounds. If you're a fan of Michael B. Jordan, I did enjoy some of his performances, but in totality as a movie, if you're a Bradbury fan, you can let this one slide. Just let it slide. burn it, let it slide.
Just forget it doesn't exist
Yeah, yeah,
and just move on. No,
exactly.
for me, like I was telling you, the two leads, although I do like Sophia, she didn't have a lot to work with. It's just Michael, when he really brings it and he's not playing one dimensional characters, which he does some one dimensional characters, but he's also given some really strong characters and really just strong performances. He's amazing. And the same with Jordan. Even I remember seeing him, I think the first thing I saw Jordan was a weird, like, it wasn't an indie film, but it was probably a smaller budgeted studio film. You've probably seen it. If you haven't, definitely see it. It's called Chronicle.
A Chronicle, yeah, I
Yeah.
was just getting ready to talk about that as one
Yeah.
to check him out in, because as an actor, he did really well in that, right? Because some of his roles, as you said, he feels like he's forced to
Yeah.
portray something like, when in Black Panther as Warmonger, it was oh come on, man, just let it flow. Don't don't huff and puff because you think your character's supposed to huff and puff.
Yeah.
But yeah, and Michael Shannon, to your point, you mentioned the movie 99 Houses. That is a fantastic film
Yeah.
with
No,
Andrew
it's awesome.
Garfield. I mean, because without giving too much away, because I think you guys would do yourself a good justice watching it. He plays a character who, does some shenanigans that gets a guy to lose his house, but he turns around and offers him a job, which is like, oh my God, this guy actually has a conscience. But by the end of the movie, you're saying, man, what a prick.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But he's good for those type of roles, right?
Yeah.
General Zod and all that other stuff. But yeah, it's I like Shannon as an actor.
The one movie that nobody talks about, and probably rightfully so, Bob Odenkirk did a comedy, and I actually did cover it. Let's Go to Prison.
Yeah.
He has a small apartment and he plays like the psychopath Shannon. Shannon can do the serious psychopath, but his character also is very funny in this small role that he has.
Yeah.
And it's outstanding. And nobody gives this film enough credits. But Bob Odenkirk's one hell of a director, television and film. And this is one between him, Dax Shepard, and it's got is it Will Forte? The one that was on, I want to say either Will Forte or not Will Ferrell.
Will Arnett. Will
Will
Arnett.
Arnett. Yes,
That's
Will
it.
Arnett. Yes.
Will Arnett. Yeah.
He just slaughters the role. And it's a
Yeah.
stupid movie. And I think I picked it up for like a 50 cents or a buck somewhere, but it's absolutely worth watching
It
along with
is.
everybody else in the movies.
Yeah, it is. It is. Especially, Dax Shepard. Come on, man.
Well, when you want someone to play like the white trash or like the redneck character, you don't go any better than fucking Dax Shepard. That and like I always talk about, and I'm going to talk about Idiocracy again. I'm going to mention 2 episodes in a row. But he plays in Idiocracy. He plays a character named
Yeah.
Frito. Fucking Frito.
To his credit, it always has me quote him.
Uh,
I like money.
and also another one that he's in. He's in a movie with what's that stand-up comedian? Is it Dane? Not Dax Shepard. I can't think of the other guy that everybody hates.
Yeah, Dane
Yes.
Cook.
Employee of the month. He also
Yeah.
plays a real asshole in Employee of the Month, and he plays it perfectly.
That was a good movie. That was.
Yeah.
I enjoyed it myself. That.
So I saw those two. Now I think I posted this video game on my Facebook page, and I might have mentioned it before, but in case I didn't, I'm going to go a little more in depth. 2025 game. I know it when I talked to you on Friday. I mentioned it came out in May, and this is called The Precinct. This is a top-down game. It's very similar to the original GTA. It's made by a studio called Fallen Tree Games. Only 5 guys made this game, and basically you're playing a young rookie cop named Nick Cordell Jr. It's your first day on the job, and basically you're avenging the death of your father, whose also name is Nick Cordell, and apparently he died in the line of duty. And you're also a rookie cop, so you're learning how to become, a cop, basically. What makes this game cool is it's got like a whole sandbox thing going on. It's got some really cool synth music. And what's really, really fun about this game is you really have to follow like the police protocol. So like when you're arresting someone, if you just arrest them without reading them rights, you get points taken away. Like you have to make sure you check their ID, call in to the police station. Then they'll tell you if there's any charges. Then you have to search him and see if he has anything on him. And you have to do everything through a certain step-by-step process. Otherwise, you fuck up and you can screw up a mission. It's not like GTA in the sense that you can just go out and do carnage because I've done that a couple times because the urge to do just that is like, I'm going to abuse my authority like all cops and then start over the mission.
Yeah,
but it's fun. It's a fun game. Absolutely a fun game. You can pick it up on PC, on Steam. Steam has it for $25, but if you pick it up on PlayStation or PlayStation 5 or the new Xbox, it's like $30. It's the only thing it's not available on yet is the Switch, but this is a lot of fun. It's something to hold us over until GTA 6 comes out, if
Right.
GTA 6 ever does come out, because at this point it's only been like what fucking 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah. But
So
yeah, I was gonna say that that game, the way you described it to me, it reminded me of Sierra Studios, Police
yes,
Quest, the Police Quest series.
Sierra, back in the day, man, that I played King's Quest for 1 and 2. I
Yep.
used to go to the library because they had an Apple IIe computer, so I'd play that. And then, of course, because I was a young burgeoning teen, I was a pervert. So, of course, I had to play Leader Suit Larry, which also
Yeah.
was a Sierra game.
Yep.
Like 12, 13 years old. I remember like getting a hold of it, like a copy of it from my friend and like secretly installing it in my dad's PC. But they went on vacation. I remember playing it for one weekend for like 48 hours straight.
Gosh, that's awesome.
All right. So that wraps up what I've been watching. Just bear with me, guys, here. So I am going to talk a little bit about our man, Mr. Ray Bradbury himself. So just bear with me for a second. So Ray Bradbury, of course, is a writer known for fantasy, sci-fi, horror, mystery, and even realistic fiction. He was influenced by guys like H.G. Wells. I'll call back to our previous episode when we talked about the time machine. Guys like Jules Verne, Edgar Allan Poe, and he, believe it or not, started writing horror stories at like the age like 12 years old, and a lot of them were, he himself admits, were paying homage to like Edgar Allan Poe, and they were basically like Edgar Allan Poe ripoffs, effectively. But he acknowledges it, so I give him respect. He published the first version of this in February of 1951. It was called The Fireman. It was originally a short story, and it was published in a magazine called Galaxy Science Fiction. They really responded well to him, and they asked him, they said, hey, listen, if you could give us another 250,000 words, we can just make this a novel and we could publish a novel. So that happened. What's interesting about how he did that, he was married to his wife. They didn't have a lot of money, struggling writer, go figure. Not too many of them out there, right? Struggling writers. He
What?
actually went, I know, right? It's like a starving filmmaker, starving musician. So he went to his local library. And I guess at the time, for like maybe 10 cents every half an hour, you could rent a typewriter. So he spent about a total of $9.80 in this little library room, trapped, writing, typing away. And eventually he finished up. It got published as a novel. But what's also interesting, as well as being published as a full novel, it was also published in serial form in Playboy magazine, of all places. So yeah, you can check out some naked tits and while you're there, read some popular fiction. A lot of people don't realize this. I think Playboy's changed their format. Someone told me they actually don't have pictures anymore. Like they don't have like layouts of women. I think they completely got rid of that. I guess they want it to be taken more seriously. From what I understand, believe it or not, that happened a couple years ago.
If
So
so, then yeah, yeah. I honestly, it's been years. So I believe you.
no, I haven't picked it up in years either.
I believe you.
Or months or days. I don't know. No,
It's been a couple
I can't
hours.
afford to pay for porn. All right. No, but it's interesting because, obviously, people don't expect Playboy and they expect popular fiction. But believe it or not, surprisingly, they did have like popular authors or even up and coming authors. Like Kurt Vonnegut was actually published. He published some short fiction in there and some other writers. So yeah, they published that in serial form in 1954. Through March, April, and May. They published the entire story, as well as being published separately as a novel. It was written during the McCarthy era, and it was inspired by a couple things. A lot of people think it's just the idea of burning books and that kind of thing, but there is a little more to it. It was inspired by the burnings in Nazi Germany, but he also wrote it to warn about the dangers of a society that prioritizes mass media over intellectual curiosity and critical thinking. So to me, that's especially interesting because when you think about it, like back then, 1954, it had television, movies, maybe radio. But then you think about now, let's face it, I'll be the first to admit I have a panic attack if my fucking phone isn't like within 10 inches of me, because without my phone, that's like my lifeline. I don't have a regular landline. I don't carry around my laptop, but my phone is like my baby. And I always need it to check my email or check my Facebook or check my text messages, And it's interesting, even back then, Ray Bradbury was starting to already think like that. Like he's already starting to see that people have become so connected to their media that they're almost afraid to actually interact with human beings, the people that they love, friends, even strangers, just have like regular interactions. I think to a certain degree, and I'm going to go off on a slight tangent, only a slight one, even with the younger generation, I mean, we're both in our 50s. I see not all, but a lot of like the teenagers and even 20s and early 30s, they've become so acclimated to that world that some of them are might be naturally introverts, but some of them I think are becoming more introverted. Not that there's anything wrong with being an introvert, but even more introverted because they're so attached to their devices, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
And even myself, to a certain extent, as a 50-year-old man, you know, like I will acknowledge that.
Well, yeah. So I guess I'm the opposite because I still use a flip phone.
Nice.
No, I am just kidding. That's a total lie right there. So,
Dude, I respect that. I would totally respect that.
but no, I still got a landline. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the younger generation. Oh gosh, it kind of goes back to what the line I quoted: "Do what you're taught to do." Right. And
Mm,
there was a news story a couple months ago. I think sometime last year actually, where I was reading it, and it actually had parents videotaping their little infant, like 10, 12, 1 year old, and
mhm.
it was dreaming while it was napping, and it was started crying. And what got me when you watch this video is the kid's like doing this, right? He's moving his arm up and down, left and right, like he's swiping on a freaking iPad while he's dreaming. Dude, folks, take the shit away. I'm sorry. It's I don't understand. I mean, I do relate to. I mean, what did Bradbury say during an interview? It's like he's not trying to predict the future; he's trying to prevent it. Something
Yeah,
along those lines. And folks, here we are. Come on, seriously, take that damn thing away. Come outside. Let
yeah,
them go
seriously.
play, all that good stuff. Because you're right, it is a crutch. Myself personally, if I forget my phone, oh well, forget my phone. Well, what if it's an emergency? Well, you got your phone, right? Yeah, they'll call
Yeah,
you. Oh,
sure.
what do you do? You know what I mean? So, and I will say because of my job, because I'm online so often, there's times where I welcome the break from technology.
Well, you're smart. You know, you're absolutely smart. I think honestly, that's the best way to be. I think there's got to be a careful middle ground where
Yeah, yeah,
we all know the evils of technology, of course, but let's acknowledge there are some positives to technology, and I feel like there's a middle ground between being completely dependent on it, where you feel like if you don't have it at your disposal every 5 seconds, like I said, you're gonna
yeah,
have a fucking panic attack, versus the opposite of completely separating yourself from it. And like you got guys like Woody Harrelson who doesn't even have a cell phone because he's afraid, or he doesn't use a microwave. You know,
right,
like he's completely on that other camp where it's just like, I don't need any technology. I'll go live in my hut
right,
and smoke my
exactly,
bong.
exactly.
As long as I got my edibles and
Yeah,
my vegan diet, you know what I mean? So
yeah,
like there's gotta be that middle area for me personally.
yeah.
I'm
No,
trying to work to get to that middle area.
you're right, and Bradbury, like I said, he was seeing it, right? And like I said, I always remember that interview, and shoot, I gotta find it and watch it again. But yeah, he's right. He's not trying to predict the future. He's trying to prevent it because you're right. You mentioned the movie Idiocracy, right? Man, that shit's fast approaching. I'm sorry, it is.
Laugh at that movie, and I've had people that have seen it for the first time. They're like in shock because they do laugh, but then they realize once they're done laughing that holy shit, if you go
Yeah.
in, not to be an asshole, but I'm gonna be an asshole. You walk into place my local Walmart, and I'm seeing that evolution take place because I'm seeing some of the characters, and yes, I'm judging a book by its cover, all puns
Yeah.
intended. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of these people that are like, yeah, they're not one step away from Frito. There's evolution is happening right in front of me as I'm at the fucking self checkout line at Walmart.
Exactly.
It's right there.
Yeah, it's all over the place, man. But
At least here in Jersey. I can't speak for everyone, but so anyway, back now that I'm done with my little mini rant, yeah. So he saw the growing influence of stuff like television and other forms of mass media as a potential threat to individual thought, you know, and that's the big thing, you know. He recounts a story about how him and one of his friends were walking in the evening, and it wasn't like 1 o'clock in the morning. They were just walking maybe 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening throughout their neighborhood. They were just having a conversation with each other about life and stuff. And a cop pulled them over and basically read them like the third degree, gave them like the riot act for like, why are you out here? And it's like, because I feel like being out here, dude. Like I'm just here with my friend having a conversation, going for a walk. So I think that ties a little bit into some of what we'll talk about later on, but some of the themes of the totalitarian control government,
yeah,
wanting complete control of its citizens and wanting everyone to think alike and be alike, that kind of stuff.
absolutely.
1 second. When we get into the actual production, like I said, the film came out in 1966. I'm going to start to talk a little bit about, before I talk about the script, the film faced some pretty serious issues. One, Truffaut apparently spent 6 years trying to get to the point where he could actually make the film. He finally got the go ahead from Universal. He cast Oscar Warner. Oscar Warner was a guy that was from Austria, and he'd been through a lot in his life. And he actually had worked with Truffaut, I think in 62 or 60 through 62 or 63, I want to say off the top of my head, on a film called Jules and Jim. So he actually had worked with Truffaut before, a little bit early on in his career, but he was still up and coming at the time. And now at this point, Warner had started to had a couple hits. He worked on a film called The Ship of Fools, which came out in the 60s, before a couple of years before this. He won a Golden Globe. He worked a couple other films that it's starting to give him a little more notoriety. So when they went to go make this film, Truffaut was really having troubles with him because they both had kind of different visions. I think from what I read, or man, Oscar Warner wanted to play like this really heroic character. And I think Truffaut didn't really want it. Not that he didn't want him to be a hero to a certain degree, but he wanted to portray the character in more in a dramatic way, in the sense that this is just a man and having his eyes opened for the first time to this world, because this is a guy that believed in the government and believed in this is the way things are. And this is, we follow the letter of the law, what the government says. And now all of a sudden he's opened up to a whole new world, and he's just done a complete 180. So they had struggles with how they saw the character and how it should be. Um, Truffaut asked Warner to let go of playing the character like some great in TV show and just show some modesty, basically. He complained he was giving like a robotic performance instead of a sense of wonder when discovering the books for the first time. And he felt that led to a stilted performance. So there was a lot of tension between those two guys. They were on a budget. And then some of the bigger things, like the last 2 weeks of filming, they got to a point where they refused to talk to each other. And they actually used the producer as a go between to communicate. They did that. And then also Mr. Warner just to piss off Truffaut, during the last 2 weeks of shooting, he changed his haircut. He had his haircut because he knew it would lead to a continuity issue. So these guys were getting really petty.
He walked off set.
Yeah.
He walked off set, so they forced Truffaut to use a body double too, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, which was interesting, right? Because like you said, digging into Oscar Warner, it was weird to like understand his history and then his need for conflict, because apparently he got drafted into Germany's Vornacht, which was the General Army during 1941. You know, during World War One. World War II, I'm sorry. So, and he was a pacifist, so he did everything to go out of his way to get kicked out of it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
now later in life, he's like, no, I'm looking to needle and create conflict. It was weird for a supposed pacifist, but yeah, here we are.
Yeah, it's also interesting too, because like he was forced into the war, and then apparently his wife was Jewish, and apparently I think he was trying to hide her because obviously during
Yep.
that time they were taking anyone, unfortunately, that was Jewish, part of history as we all know it, and they're trying to kill him. So he was going through a lot. So it was interesting. I think also part of what makes this a tough thing to watch, and this is no disrespect to Warner, you had Truffaut directing for the first time in English. A lot of the crew were people that spoke English. Some of them were people that spoke French. Him and Warner both spoke French, but then on top of that, you also have little things like Warner actually, because of his accent being so thick, at least for me when I was watching it, I genuinely enjoyed all the performances by him, Beatty, and Clarice, our main three characters. But with him in particular, because his accent was so thick, I personally felt like I really had to focus to kind of really truly embrace it and get the emotional impact that I was looking for
Yeah.
personally.
So
It's not that I didn't understand what he was saying. So let me clarify it. I did understand what he was saying, but I felt like it also added a little bit to that iciness and maybe that stilted performance that Truffaut was complaining about.
and it's from life experiences. I know when we were living in Germany first time, and I studied and became fluent in Deutsch. Um, and then coming back stateside, but then having also a sister-in-law who's German. So, your experience, it was like, man, you were struggling to understand what he was saying because of his accent, right? But you know, life experiences, like, I dug it. It came across just fine for me. So it's interesting to hear that point. That's pretty
It's not that to clarify, like I was able to understand what he was saying, but I think for some people it might have been a little bit difficult. I
yeah,
felt like
yeah.
I
Again,
think
because
so.
of the accent, like you said,
Yeah.
right? If you're not used to it, right? It's like those who've never been to England, and then they, you know, the first time they get there, and then they hear, yeah, they go to London, but then they hear, you know, they go to what is it, Cockney, and then it gets like really heavy, and it's like, holy Christ, what is he saying? He's speaking English. Just listen.
I'm gonna get a lot of hate from all my people over Europe and the Europeans. They're like, "You fucking dumb American." Dude, listen, I sat there train spotting, okay, and a lot of people I know people that like don't watch indie films and foreign films, and they watch train spotting, and they were like, "What the fuck did that motherfucker?" And I totally got that, and I even did get what he was saying, but
Yeah,
I do understand the point of what Truffaut was saying as far
right.
as. And it's just interesting the production the production is interesting because like I said this is the first time Truffaut was trying to do an English film. I know he originally wanted to shoot the film in black and white, but Universal wasn't having that. They're like, listen, dude.
Yeah, that's so that was like this was his first movie in color, right?
Yeah,
Technically,
first movie
yeah,
in
the first,
color, first
yeah.
movie in English. Some other interesting things, people like Paul Newman and Peter O'Toole and even Terrence Stamp were all considered for the role of Montag. But for whatever reason, it just didn't pan out with them. Some other little pieces of trivia. Some of the books being burned in the movie, believe it or not, were Ray Bradbury's own books, like
Yep.
The Martian Chronicles, Fahrenheit 451, the actual novel, stuff like that. So there's interesting things like that that I think that are interesting. So I talked about that. I'm just going to cheat here and scroll to my tablet here. And next thing before I actually get into the script and stuff, I'm going to talk about some differences between the film and the novel that came out. The main thing that I noticed is the relationship. So in the film, Clarice and Montag form a romance, where in the novel it's more of like a friendship. But they in the film they kind of like hint towards the end that there's going to be like
Yeah.
they don't get like heavy kissy kissy or anything like that, but they feel you feel like it's going to lead to a romance. So that was one of the things in the original novel. I got big spoilers here, guys. If you haven't read the novel or seen the movie, I should have said that ahead of time. So Elise dies in the novel. In the film, she actually guides Montag. Much like in the book, there's a character named Faber who's an English professor, used to be an English professor. He's omitted from the 1966 film, actually, and I think he's omitted from the 2018 film as well. Yeah, and he's basically a former English teacher, and he helps Montag in the film, but he's nowhere to be seen. In this, they put a lot of that heavy lifting on the character of Clarice. And then the next big thing, and this makes sense when you think about 1966, there was a mechanical hound, basically a robotic dog, and they were basically capable of sniffing out human DNA. And again, completely absent in the film. But when you think about it, 1966 technology, that would have probably been very difficult to pull off in a way that didn't look like a bad imitation of like a Harryhausen product. You know what I mean? Like it would have been a hard. And I love Harryhausen. I have a couple box sets of his stuff, so this isn't a
Yeah.
knock on him, but more of like 1966. They're like, what do we have to work with? So you can see why they omitted that.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly right.
When it came out in '66, it had a budget of 1,500,000, so $1.5 million. And what's interesting is, sadly, I guess they must have marketed this much like an art film. Where I live, the art films you have to travel like an hour to go see like an art film. It only grossed in the U.S. a total of $509. Worldwide, it grossed a total of $11,206. I think I read over the years since then it's actually made a little bit of money through home media, DVD, Blu-ray, VHS, that kind of stuff. But at the time, it wasn't considered a success. And believe it or not, it wasn't just a commercial failure, but sadly, it was a critical failure. A lot of the critics at the time didn't care for it. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the audiences didn't really care for it as much. I think the people that were familiar with the source material just didn't feel quite as connected as they did with the actual novel. Now, since then, over the years, it's been reevaluated. And this film, I think, has been, with careful reevaluation, I see a lot more positive reviews on this film. But back in the day, it wasn't something that was met with this like, oh my God, Francis Truffaut is making his first film in English. I can't wait to get my hands on this. There was a lot of people that saw it, and unfortunately, they weren't blown away by it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately. You right?
Excuse me. Yeah. Yeah.
No, no problem.
So, I mean, it suffers because, again, for those who have read the book and understand, right, the book spans over a couple days, right? And the movie tries to extend it, right? And so it tries to do a little bit of world building while trying to do some character development. But the baseline story itself, unfortunately, when translated to film, didn't quite lend itself. There were some, really good moments.
Absolutely.
But like you said, between, oh geez, what was her name? Julie Christie playing Montauk's wife and Clarice.
Yeah.
It got to a point where it's like, okay, we're expanding. There's too much expansion or expanding time on these little bit parts where, if you had flipped it a little bit and like you said, get back to the story of Guy Montag himself,
Yeah.
it could have been a little bit better. Also, to your point about the marketing, yeah, it's this movie being his first color movie done in Technicolor. It does hit you in the face. In sometimes when you're watching, you're like, "Is this like a Warhol movie? What the hell's going on here?" With
Yeah.
the vibrance, but then you get to the character scenes, and it's all bland color. It's like muted grays, browns, greens, where all of a sudden you get to, a simple wall on the street and it's this bright fire engine red. It's like, so I think, yeah, that definitely hurt it. And again, when you try to put yourself in a 1966 audience, I think just a combination of, not really understanding what the movie is until like the last 30 minutes of the movie is where it really suffers again because of the world building issues and character development issues coming up into it.
No, absolutely. No, there's definitely what you're seeing. We're seeing what you're saying, and honestly, I would have been curious to see what it would have looked like in black and white because I feel like because he didn't want to do it in color and because he had only worked in black and white up to that point, I think it would have been perhaps a little bit stronger just because I think he just felt more comfortable. And let's face it, if you feel comfortable with whether you're giving a lecture, whether you're putting together something, whatever it is, if you feel comfortable in what you're doing, you're always going to get a better final product, I think,
Right,
right?
right.
Generally
Absolutely.
speaking, that's what you're gonna
Absolutely.
get. And I think
Absolutely.
between the pressure of the studio and then the pressure of this guy that he felt like wasn't giving the performance that he wanted and trying to argue with him because he all of a sudden he felt like he was like this guy that was I just won a Golden Globe a couple of years earlier.
Yeah.
He's a little bit maybe perhaps, I don't know, maybe I'm a little leading in here, but perhaps a little thinking he's a little full of himself and
Yep.
he should be being able to, he should have some input. So I think there were a couple things that probably led to that.
Right.
All right. At this point, we'll get into our director, Mr. Francis Truffaut here. So obviously, he's a French gentleman. He was born in France, and he had started watching movies at the age of 6 and became an avid film lover. At 14, he dropped out of school and got a job. And at 15, he actually started a film club. Shortly after, he met a guy named Andre Bazin, a French film critic, who would become a mentor, going so far as to actually protect him when he deserted the army and was put in jail because he got drafted into the army. He was put in jail, and this guy helped him out. In 1953, he published his first movie critic in a French magazine called Cashiers du Cinema. So he started off as a film critic, and this was a really important moment in his life because it was here he developed the author policy, or I think as a lot of people know it as the auteur concept of filmmaking, which is basically a film theory that emphasizes the director as the creative force behind a film, suggesting a director's personal style and vision shape the narrative and aesthetic. And I think a lot of people that aren't as worldly in film, and trust me, to a certain degree, that's me, don't realize how important that is because a lot of times prior to that point in filmmaking, even smaller films, the studio kind of like controlled a lot. So this theory of auteur filmmaking is not saying that you don't need your crew, but it's just saying that like, hey, we're going to trust this guy to just do just what we hired him to, the word direct, which is talk to his crew and work towards one singular focus. So like I'll use the perfect example that it's obvious, right? You look at something like Marvel films, right? Some of them are excellent, some of them are not. Some of them are paint by numbers, and you can see that there was probably 12 producers controlling the strings, and this is just the guy that they hired, a gun for hire, if you will. And then you have certain films that you felt like the director actually had a little more say, maybe in this He was allowed to write the screenplay. He was allowed to direct, but they let him just take the film and do what he wanted to a certain degree. The best example that comes to mind off the top of my head in this analogy using Marvel would be James Gunn. You can tell whether you love or hate the guy as a director. I look at the three Guardians of the Galaxy films. They let him just use this playground and do whatever he wants. They weren't trying to hold him back in any way. They weren't telling him, you can't do this, you can't do that. And this whole idea of the auteur theory of filmmaking is just that. This was an important thing for filmmaking because if you're a writer, filmmaker, musician, you don't want, there's nothing wrong with the process of collaboration. So let me clarify that. There's nothing wrong with collaborating with someone, but you want to make sure you have a vision that's singular or with just maybe one other person so that you have a strong vision, because otherwise the vision becomes diluted. And what happens when something gets diluted? You're not getting the same thing, you know? So that's what I think of when I think of like that whole idea of auteur, that whole theory of filmmaking and why this was such an important thing. I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are when it comes to that kind of stuff, or like when you think about directors that you love and like how they direct stuff and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, the auteur theory it was really important because again, it's when we watch a movie or a TV show or play a game or read a book, right? There's that one person that's either going to get praise or they're going to start with the famine of negativity you're going to throw their way. So that's what it essentially boils down to. I'm seeing more and more now with executive input, studio input, where the auteur theory is suffering
Yeah,
quite a
unfortunately.
bit, unfortunately. So to your point, like James Gunn, you mentioned, the Guardians of the Galaxies, right? One of his other films, absolutely phenomenal. Slither,
Yeah, absolutely.
another movie that I found actually very intriguing and actually enjoyed it. The Belko Experiment,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
written by him. He's an example of just what when you apply the author theory correctly, what you'll see what you can deliver.
yeah.
But it's
It's trusting. It's
it
trusting. It's trusting.
exactly right. And if you don't trust the director, that means you don't trust that the director is going to be able to deliver to you an audience, right? It's Mission Impossible. It follows a simple formula. John Wick series follows the same formula as the Mission Impossible. So trust the process and trust the director to put it all together for you. The audiences will come, but if you're going to be nitpicking every little thing, you're going to suffer from it.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's definitely one of the founding, if one of, or if not the founding father of, the auteur theory, which is actually very intriguing in the sense that, digging into his background a little bit, this guy actually had a moniker, right? The grave digger of French cinema. Yeah, because before all this, he was a film critic and he was an unforgiving film critic from what I read and
Mm.
found through some various articles. So to see him all of a sudden get behind the camera, I can see his understanding of again taking those world experiences, those life experiences, and putting it forward. And in this specific case, right, his attempt to put it in celluloid and show that trust me, this is what I want to deliver to you. But to your point, when the studio goes, no, we would like it in color. Uh, uh, and then this is going to be English only. Oh, so what do you think? I can only imagine him. He's like, bon chance, which is good luck in French, with getting this done. And we see a little bit of that suffering from because honestly, I think if to your point, if he was in his comfort zone, the author theory really would have come out. I think we would have had a little bit different product
Yeah.
than what was finally produced.
And I will say another thing that I forgot to mention. Apparently, even the script was written in French because he knew that Werner could speak it and read it. So I think also probably when they translated some of the words, let's face it, probably more, and a lot of people do, different languages, certain words, just there isn't an English word, or I'm sure there's certain French words that there isn't an English word for a French word that is exactly the same. It might have a different connotation or a different meaning or a different inflection.
Right.
So I feel like
Right.
that also probably might have been a slight disservice when it came to translating the French script to an English script,
Oh yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
all things. Anyway, back to him. So in 1957, he got his big break. And I will joke about this because it boils down to nepotism, guys. He married the daughter of an important film distributor. And because of that, I'd like to think that that gave him the money to found his own company, Less Films. Less Films du Carus, if I'm getting that name correctly. Okay. Let the mispronunciation begins, guys. Starts with French. It goes all over the place. In 1959, he made his first feature. He directed his first film, The 400 Blows. This marked the beginning of the new wave uh, of French filmmaking, a new way of making movies. I'm not going to go through his entire resume because we got a lot to go here. 400 Blows, 59, which is the first one. Shoot the Piano Player in 1960. Jules and Jim in 62, of course, right, for 451 in 66. Day for Night in 73 and Love on the Run in 79. Those were his big films. I might be missing one or two there, but those are the ones that I think people know him for. I heard was becoming more difficult to work with and a little bit pickier on the films that he was selecting, which I think kind of into Oscar Warner having more options because he did work with him on Jules and Jim. And like I said, he did some other films, but I think Oscar Warner probably would have had more films of his resume. But I hear it wasn't just this film that he was hard to work with, apparently. I heard that he was kind of a little bit troublesome. It was also written by Francois Truffaut and a guy named Jean Louis Richard. Gene did this. He did Emmanuel. Here you go. I never seen any of those movies, but everyone talks about the Emmanuel movies. Those, I think they're like soft, essentially soft Skinamax, but classy Skinamax. Day for Night in 1973. He wrote the screenplay for that. He wrote the screenplay for a film called The Bride Wore Black in 68. And yeah, that's a little bit about Mr. Jean Louis Richard. We also have our cinematographer. Now, this one's interesting. Cinematographer early on in his career, before he became a director, we have Mr. Nicholas Roeg. Now, Nicholas Roeg, that guy's a freaking icon. Actually, not too long ago, our fellow friends, Sam and Will, over at the Gentleman's Guide to Midnight Cinema, they were talking about one of his earlier films that came out in 71 called Walkabout, which he also directed. He did the cinematography. He did the directing. Some of his other cinematography assignments. He worked on a film with Oliver Reed called The Girl Getters in 64. The Mask of the Red Death. So he wasn't above working with Mr. Corman. I love that Corman film, Mask of the Red Death, and a bunch of other things. But eventually he would go on to directing Don't Look Now, 73, The Man Who Fell to Earth in 76.
David Bowie.
Yeah. Castaway. Another Ollie Reed collaboration in 86. And then he did that movie, I think it was on HBO all the time when I was a kid, called The Witches, which came out in 1990. Yeah. So yeah, you really have a guy that started off, said, hey, I'd like this cinematography, but let's give this directing thing a shot. And he became one hell of a director. Getting into our music, we have a composer. We have Mr. Bernard Herrmann. This guy's another icon in the industry, guys. I mean, this guy started off early on with stuff like Citizen Kane, The Magnificent Ambersons in 42, The Wrong Man in 56, then a ton of stuff with Hitchcock, like Vertigo, North by Northwest, you have Psycho, Jason and the Argonauts.
Yeah, that's, wow.
Seven Voyages, of Sinbad. I mean, the list goes on. Taxi Driver. This guy fucking did the Taxi Driver.
Taxi Driver. That's what blew me away when I got back down into it. I was like, oh my God, I completely forgot he did this.
Yeah, so he's got quite a nice career on him. And I was a surprise because I think I'd first seen this film back when I was in high school. I just finished reading the book. I went to the local library, I rented it. And I was like, oh, okay. That music sounds familiar. Like I've heard like a similar sound before. And then I was like, oh, it's the same guy that did the music for Psycho and all these other 10 million films. But back then we didn't have Internet Movie Database back in the 90s. No. So that wasn't a thing. Now I can cheat between Wikipedia, Google, and IMDb.com. I can get a lot of information. We go on to our editing. We have a gentleman named Mr. Tom Noble. He's worked on films like Witness in 85, another Harrison Ford film, The Mosquito Coast in 86, Thelma and Louise in 91, Red Dawn in 84, The Violent Enemy in 67, just a ton of stuff, Yeah. I just named some of the ones that people might be more recognizable films. He has a lot more than just that.
What movie was Red Dawn? I've never seen that.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Come on, people.
Yeah, that was another one that I think, like back in the day, like we were a typical middle class family, so we'd rent a lot. But then obviously once my dad got the transition, he was one of those people that bought the beta player first because I don't want this in beta. Beta was the superior format, goddammit. But
no, it was not.
It sold better. VHS sold better. So then he was like, fuck, I guess I got to get a VHS player. And then, we had HBO, and he would get the tape, buy like 3 or 4 tapes, and he'd load like 3 to 4 movies on these tapes. You'd have like 4 movies up. And that was one of the ones that we had in the collection. And it was
Absolutely.
awesome. But that was one of those ones you watch time and time again. When we get into our cast, we obviously have Oscar Warner, like I said, playing Guy Montag. Like I mentioned, he was an Oscar nominee for A Ship of Fools in '66. He won a Golden Globe for The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. I never saw, but it's on my list. Obviously, Jules and Jim in '62. The Shoes of the Fisherman in '68, Voyage of the Damned in '76. Those are just a couple highlights. There's a lot more to his career. Julia Christie, now this surprised me. She's playing Clarice, and she's also playing Linda. Clarice is our next door neighbor. Linda is his wife. She made her debut in a TV sci-fi show called A for Andromeda in '61. She was actually considered for one of the early James Bond films. She was considered for Dr. No in '62, but producers didn't think she was busty enough. Fucking producers, man. Even then, sexism existed.
Yeah.
But fuck the producers, because you know what? She'd go on to a pretty huge career because she did Billy Liar in '63, Dr. Zhivago in '65, Far from the Madding Crowd in '67, Cave and Mrs. Miller in '71. Another collaboration with our director of photography, Mr. Nicholas Rogue, and Don't Look Now. She actually even popped up in stuff like Dragonheart in '96.
She was the Queen
Yeah.
of Dragonheart, 1996.
Was in Troy in 2004. And she made it into Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban in '04. And I think more recently, the thing I saw her, and she did a film in 2012. Well, not recently, but 2012. As recent as we can get, called The Company You Keep. The Company You Keep, which is a little indie film with Robert Redford, which is pretty decent. She's still alive, which is always good. And she has a pretty long history career. Now, this is a guy that I wasn't overly familiar with. Playing the role of our captain, Mr. Captain Beatty, we have a gentleman, Earl Cusack, mostly a character actor, but he's popped up in a bunch of stuff. Odd Man Out in 1947, Escape in 1948, The Man Who Never Was in '56, also The Spy Who Came In From the Cold in '65 with Oscar. But then he pops up in stuff with like Daniel Day-Lewis and My Left Foot and Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, Far and Away. Not that anyone wants to talk about that film too much, but he pops up in that. So he's a pretty interesting actor. And in this particular role, like I said, it's the only thing I really remember him from. He doesn't. I was pretty impressed with playing like this badass, kind of like hard as nails, kind of dick role, which isn't always easy to do. I think people think it's easy to play like these. I'm not going to say piece of shit, but let's face it, not too far from that, And I think he
does a good job playing the boss you hate.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
And especially because he's cold as nails when we get into the script. I'm only going to talk about one other actor because I think these 4 actors are the most important ones. Now, she only has a small part, but I think it's a really pivotal part. And to me, it was one of the parts in the film that has the most emotional impact, despite the fact that she only has a small part. And she's playing, the actress name is Bea Duffel. She's playing the book woman. She's an elderly lady, which I'll get into the script later on. She has a pivotal scene where she gets kind of like burned alive, surrounded by her library of books. Again, I'll get into that when we get to the actual script. But for me, that was like a moment in the film. I was like, wow, that's just like a really like emotional hammer right to the nuts, guys. Yeah. Really tough scene. She's been in stuff like, believe it or not, talking about James Bond films a minute ago. She was in the Casino Royale from '67, A Night to Remember in '58, Quartermass in the Pit from Hammer Films in '67. She pops up in Battle Beneath the Earth in '67. And in her very last film, this is how you end a film on a positive note. You end your career with Monty Python on the Holy Grail in '75. That was the very last film. Yeah. So if you're going to end your film on your career on a positive note, you go out with Monty Python on the Holy Grail. All right. Now the story, I am going to go into a lot. I'm trying to remember this, based exactly from the novel, from the film. So I think I got it straight, guys. If I missed something here, Mr. John Nance will chime in. We start somewhere in the future. Doesn't tell us exactly when in the future. I guess it's not really relevant. We live in a totalitarian government. And in this world, firemen don't put out fires, but instead they seek out and destroy all literature. They can search anyone, anytime, with no real reason. That's the kind of government we're living in. And we're introduced to one particular fireman, Mr. Guy Montag. And it starts off, and it doesn't even start off with him. It starts off with a guy in an apartment and he's getting a phone call, and we hear a voice on the other end, and it sounds like a female voice. I'm going to make the assumption it's Clarice, but I could be wrong because they never actually say. And she says, get out right away. And you see this guy get out of his apartment and just take off. The next scene, we see a bunch of firemen come to this apartment and they just go through it, and they're looking at all sorts of unusual places for anywhere that someone might be hiding something. And they get like a screwdriver and they open up a little TV, like something my grandmother used to have, one of those old square ugly TVs, and they find a whole stack of books. But then they open up like the heater vent and they find more books. They, as far as I know, I don't remember they actually capture that guy, but they basically, this is our first introduction to this world. We get a vibe of what this world's about and what kind of world we're living in. Where hey, we're not putting out fires, we're burning fucking books. And it definitely is a little bit jarring, especially if you've never read the book, you've never seen any versions of the movie before. It'll definitely throw you for a loop, perhaps. Then next, we cut to the next day, and we see the same guy that were introduced earlier, this Guy Montag, and he's walking down the street in his neighborhood, and we see a young, not girl, but probably teenager, early 20s. Her name is Clarice. She's a young teacher. She kind of introduces herself to him. She says, hey, I think you're one of my neighbors. They have a conversation about Guy's job as a fireman. And she asks him, she's like, have you ever read any of the books that you read? And of course, I guess in this world, that would be a very shocking question to be asked, because you're living in a world where no, that's the big no. Government doesn't like that. You're going to get in trouble for that. Yeah. So, of course, he's shocked by that. But he's also very curious about this girl and the conversation. Something about her is different, and she's piqued kind of an interest. So he actually starts to take a couple of the books on some of the calls they're made for, and kind of hides them in his house. One night when he gets home from work and his wife's in bed, he grabs one of the books from the hiding place, and it's a Charles Dickens book called David Copperfield, and he starts reading it. His wife, Linda, kind of catches on, and of course, she's very upset because, like I said, we're living in a society where that's a no-no. We get early on a very vibe from them that they're not in the best relationship situation. They're very disconnected. You can see that the love between them really is very distant, even before the whole book thing becomes an issue. She's kind of lost in this world. We're talking about earlier about the idea of mass media and living in the world and trying to avoid connecting with people. And she's just that. She's watching what's literally would be considered like a flat screen TV. And it's basically like an interactive TV program where the viewer at a certain point is prompted and you're actually able to interact with the television program. But she's kind of lost in that world. But you could kind of get the vibe she's not leading a very fulfilling life. She's leading a very empty life. What's interesting, and I'll just talk about it for just 2 seconds. In the novel, the way it's described, it's not just even a big screen TV. It's like the whole wall of a house is like basically a big screen TV. It's basically turned into that.
It's that dream 100-inch Sony or Samsung OLED TV wall that everybody wants.
Probably like still $10,000. Maybe eventually it'll come down to a reasonable price. But yeah, no. But yeah. So their relationship is very. You get early on, it's very disconnected. She cares more about being popular and fitting in. Her biggest aspiration is just being popular enough to be just a part of this interactive TV program and have a bigger role. The next day we cut to work, and they're at the house of an older lady with a huge library of books. We meet Captain Beatty more intimately, Montag's boss. Beatty explains about how books make people unhealthy and makes them think that they're better than other people. And this leads to antisocial behavior. The book collector, an older woman, who also, by the way, was seen with Clarice briefly. They see a scene where they're walking down the street, following Montag, refuses to leave her house. They go upstairs to her, I guess, attic, essentially. And she doesn't just have a couple books or even 10 or 20 books. She has a whole library going on, but she refuses to leave. And we kind of really get the sense of how big of a prick this Captain Beatty character is, because Montag's like, well, you can't stay here. We got to go. And we're going to go serve your time. But she refuses to leave. And he almost wants to force her. But Beatty's like, no, leave her there with the books. Let her to burn with the things that she loves. So she goes down with the books in the house on fire. And it's, like I said, it's a very brief scene, but for me, it goes to show you how emotionally attached she is to the books and the idea of not letting go of that. So for me, it kind of really hit home. That was that particular moment.
Yeah, it's I'm sorry,
Oh, I
yeah,
want you to chime in.
that scene's important in the context of, for the listeners out there, right? You treasure something so much that when someone that because of what you treasure gives you the truth to understand that what they're asking of you to do is either immoral or just flat out wrong. It gives you the strength to stand upon conviction. And that scene really shows you that she literally stood upon her conviction and that she was going to die for her convictions. To your point, it was a very powerful scene.
Yeah, she didn't care about the way things were now.
Exactly.
This is what I believe in. It's like, you give me someone that believes in, a religion or a science or whatever it is, but just standing behind the thoughts of what you
Yeah.
believe. This is something I believe in firmly, and I'm not going to bow to someone else because you
Yeah.
won't let me do that. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. So yeah, the next day, or no, I'm sorry, later that night, Montag arrives home, and he finds his wife Linda, but she's unconscious. Of course, even though he's disconnected, and they don't have the best relationship. It's his wife. Next to her bed, he finds a bottle of empty pills, and he calls the authorities. And they get there, and there's these two guys in this like really gaudy plastic uniforms, and he's like, "Where's the doctor?" And he's like, "Oh, we don't need a doctor for this.
Yeah.
We do 8 or 10 of these a night. And hey, 20 minutes, she'll be like new. She'll be better than new." They just said, "Oh, you just hang out in the living room. We'll tell you when it's all done." They go in there with like this pump, like this, like it looks like literally like something you'd use to siphon gas if you were stealing gas from a neighbor or something, you know, and like and they're like, "Yeah, we're just gonna pump out her old blood and give her some new blood. Give her some new blood, some fresh blood. That it should be just great." So it's really very their attitude is very indifferent. And it's just really another scene that's also really fucked up. They come back, and again, after they're done with this, they remark, "Oh, she's going to wake up feeling better than ever in the morning, better than new, and incredibly hungry." So eventually, he falls asleep. Yeah, he wakes up and he finds her in the kitchen, and she's happier than ever, just like they said. She's eaten a ton of food.
Got the munchies. So
Yeah, she's got the munchies. You would think she had an edible, but no, she just had a blood transfusion. Who knows? That's what a blood transfusion did, but she's got the munchies, and he tries to have a moment where he tries to explain to her what happens, but she just kind of dismisses him. She's just focused on just being happy and in the moment. She doesn't really care so much. But believe it or not, she's in such a happy mood for the first moment in the film. You actually feel not like that they're super in love, but they actually connect, and she flirts with him and they end up sleeping together. And it's not like but they don't really go over the scene in too much detail. They gloss over it really. The brief scene where they're intimate. What's interesting is after the film was screened to the producer was like, "Do you think, Francis, maybe you can add a little more, a little bit more something, something. We can extend this scene, maybe, add a little more appeal." And he's like, "No, the scene is fine."
yeah.
Because the one thing that he did get, he was smart enough to make sure he had written in his contract that he had final cut of the film. So he did protect himself to a certain degree, which is good. So later that night, Montag comes home from work, and we see Linda there, and she's with some friends, and they're not really engaging with each other, but more engaging with this wall screen TV. It's again like it's literally like a big screen TV. And Linda's like, "Why don't you come over here and hang out with us and talk to," I forget the two girls' names, Dora and whatever. And he's just kind of lost in his own world. But she goes over to him. She kind of prompts him to come over them. She prompts him to come over there and just try to engage and be social to some degree. And basically, when he gets there in the living room with everybody, he tries telling them about the woman that was burned alive for reading books. These people are just fucked up because their attitude is, well, that's what you get for reading books. They deserve it. And, they are very much in line with this idea, this society that, like, yeah, that's just, you don't do that. So if that's what she did, that's what she gets. He calls them a bunch of zombies, and he actually pulls out one of his books and he tries reading and I don't even remember which book it was or the exact dialogue from that book, but he tries reading a passage from a book, and this really touching poetic dialogue. And one of the girls actually starts to cry. And then the other girls call him like a monster. "I can't believe you made her cry," and blah, blah, blah. "Why would
Yeah.
you do those? Read a book. These things are dangerous. Why would you make us feel that way? I haven't felt those kind of emotions in years. And you're trying to bring out these emotions." And they all leave. he forces them. But like I said, it's a paragraph from David Copperfield. There we go. I did write that down. That night, Clarissa's house, we cut to after this scene goes down. Her house is raided. She's living with her uncle, specifically is mentioned in the movie, though we don't really ever see him. In the book, it's like more than just her uncle. Has her escape through like a hatch in, I think, the basement. So she managed to escape thanks to her uncle. Her uncle's arrested. Meanwhile, we get a scene where Montag's having a nightmare scene. And in this nightmare scene, instead of the old lady being burned alive in the house, we get Clarice being burned alive. So he's also not having the best night. He goes to work because he finds out about what happened to Clarissa's family, but he also finds out that Clarice is still on the run. He breaks into Beatty's office trying to find out more about Clarice and seeing if he can get any kind of information to lead him to Clarice to maybe possibly help her in some way. Because at this point, he had started to read books and he's starting to change his point of view on society and the way people look at books and that kind of stuff. He realizes there's something to it. Beatty catches him and confronts him, but he doesn't punish them. But we can tell he's suspicious. He basically tells them something along the lines of like, hey, listen, at some point in their career, every fireman gets that curiosity in them, that urge to find out what it is about these things, these books that we're burning. But he kind of lets him off. But you can see he's suspicious. Surprisingly, later on that day, they're on this monorail and Montag is, and he manages to find Clarice and he wants to talk to her. She pulls him to the side and she says, listen, I can't talk to you here, but come with me. And they go back to her place, her house. It's all boarded up, but they sneak in and she's trying to find some papers because these papers have the location of her uncle's friends. And we find out about her uncle's friends basically are these people they call the book people. These people live disconnected from society. They live in the woods and basically they still believe in the reading the books and they basically commit them to memory and then they burn the books. So that way they're still preserving the legacy of literature. So he's helping her try to find these papers because she's afraid that the authorities like Beatty and the rest of the guys are going to come into this house and find these papers and then they're going to be able to find these people. So of course, being a fireman, he knows where people hide things. So after some searching, he breaks open this vase. He finds the papers with the addresses. She looks at it quickly. He burns it to make sure it's an ash. And they kind of go their separate way. We cut to later that day. Tag goes back to work and he talks to Beatty and he says, Beatty, listen, I am resigning as of today. I can't do this anymore. He doesn't really tell him an explanation, but Beatty's like, hey, listen, I don't know why this all of a sudden you want to quit and retire, but no, you have to do at least one more job with us, and then you can do whatever you want, basically. Ad-libbing a little here, but he convinces him to do one more job, and this is where the big twist is because he goes to do one more job, and they pull up, and he kind of has this like look on his face, like, huh? And he pulls up to Montag's own house. Yep. And out comes his wife, Linda, who confronts him and she tells him, I can't live with this. I can't live with you and your book obsession. I can't live like this. I can't do it. So his wife leaves him. No big loss because Linda's kind of a cunt, pardon my French. And can't use a C word. Oops. I'll have to edit that out. No, she is. I could use bitch. Maybe that's a little bit nicer. Not much nicer.
There you go.
But, she is a bit of a C word. Anyway, Beatty forces him to search his own house, knowing perfectly well they're going to find stuff. They set fires to the house because they find books. Montag actually manages to kind of sneak one book, I think, in his jacket. But, of course, Beatty catches that. And he grabs it, he puts it into the pile, and then he has Montag, in the most cruel way possible, he has him pull out his little flamethrower and set fire to not only the house, but all the books. Well, we get a scene where apparently Montag's finally had his final moment of, that's it, fuck you, and he sets Beatty on fire, and we get this pretty intense chase scene, which I think is really interesting because throughout this chase scene, we see the news network televising like, hey, Guy Montag, former fireman, is on the run. And, you see the local news station, look out for him. And
be on the lookout for a white Ford Bronco.
Exactly. OJ is on the loose. I repeat, OJ is on the loose. He has killed a white woman. Capture OJ immediately now. And we see him kind of sneaking down alleyways, the most discreet way possible, sneaking to the city. But then we also see these people like in shock. No, the crazy man's on the loose, and they're going out of their house and looking. He manages to make it to this rowboat by this pond, and of course, it just conveniently happens to have a tarp. We manage just in time to hide behind the tarp, and then above him, we see these guys on these what do you want to call them? Jetpacks, I guess would be the effectively.
Yeah, they were face heaters on wires.
Yeah, basically. You see the local police, and of course, because he just manages to get underneath the tarp in just amount of time, he manages to avoid them.
Yep.
He floats his boat across the lake, and basically he finds some railroad tracks, and we see him walk through the woods until he reaches the book people, and he meets one of them, and one of them, I don't think the guy even introduces himself, to be perfectly honest with you, and he says, "Oh, welcome, welcome, we've been waiting for you." And, he's introduced to the different people in this group of book people. He's like, come here, come inside. We see a little TV. We're watching you being captured on television right now. And then, of course, we see the setup here because the government doesn't want to admit that they've been beat. So instead, they stage this capture of Montag, which, of course, is bullshit because Montag's still on the run. We learn more about, again, what I touched on earlier about these book people and how this whole society is based on the idea of getting away from all the nonsense and the censorship and preserving the thing that's important, which is literature. And basically, he explains the process of what they do. They read the books and they set fire after they've read them. And each person has committed one book to memory. Shortly thereafter, we see Clarice, and there's a reunion, and we find out that not Edgar, excuse me, we find out that he managed to save one book, an Edgar Allan Poe book. So he agrees to commit that book to memory. And what's interesting, and I thought kind of touching, is that they have a moment where you have an old man who's reading a book to his grandson. And in this scene, there's a mention of the dialogue. There's a piece of the dialogue about the falls of snow. And as we see that, shortly thereafter, the snow falls. Now, what makes that interesting, besides also having some nice symbolism, excuse me, I can make words. So besides that having some nice symbolism and being a touching moment, what's interesting about that film and what I think makes it incredibly nice is that scene was a scene that they didn't plan to put fake snow in there. They were in April shooting the last scenes of the film, and it just happened to snow. So it's interesting, that just happened to be a little happy accident, and I think it kind of adds a little nice little touch to the film. And that pretty much wraps up as far as I can recall. I tried to get this as close as I could to the actual film, the script.
Yeah, you did great.
There
Yeah,
were a
you
couple of
got it.
moments I think I might have perhaps missed a little bit. So, like I said, guys, this is very spoiler heavy. Before we talk about our final thoughts, I will say this film is a little bit difficult to find streaming anywhere. I couldn't find it streaming for free anywhere, but you can rent it for like $4, I think. But honestly, if you're a physical media lover, like you can pick this up on Amazon. It was like $8.92 plus tax. It's a 50th anniversary edition, so you get a commentary, which I didn't get around to yet, with Julia Christie. It has an interview with Ray Bradbury. It has a behind the scenes for the score, and then it has a behind the scenes for the making of the film. And then I think it might also have like an art gallery, some clips from the
Yeah.
film. So for $9, you're getting a pretty decent release. I have to give Universal credit. Even the restoration, I think, looked pretty good. So for $9, it's totally worth adding to your collection. If you don't have it, I wouldn't even bother spending the $4. Don't be a cheapskate. Just throw another $5 down and buy the
Yeah.
things you can own it. But I've been blabbering on for way too long, John. I want to hear what Mr. Korean Kool has to say. I want to hear your thoughts on, in general, the film, the book, or like what you think. I'm
So
sorry.
number one, yeah, nice job. You pretty much captured the movie most important parts because again, I think well, I'm not even gonna go there. Let me just say the movie when it starts, you have a narrator telling you who the actors are and who the narrators are. And it's a nice little twist, right? Because this is a movie where no one's allowed to read anything. Well, there's no credits at the opening. Every movie has opening credits and the title screen, right? But no. You're not allowed to even read that. Someone's going to tell you what it is. Montag, Linda, and then Clarice, great characters. Captain Beatty, man, what a prick as a
Yeah.
boss. But I think in terms of a movie, I don't think in hindsight, retrospect, the movie's job was not to entertain you, but more so to make you think.
Yeah.
Because if you read the book, which I'm going to end up going back to do because it is quite interesting in 1966 and then right the parallels it draws to those times, the parallels that it draws to modern times, right? You have a government that says you are going to believe what we tell you to believe, right? Don't trust your lying eyes, trust us, right? The scene with him trying to escape the authorities, right? We see that happening now through selective editing or manipulation or AI video, right? And for those who don't have those critical thinking skills, they're going to believe that, right? They're doing what they were taught to do.
Yeah.
It's one of the interesting things, not so much in this film, but when in the 2018 version, that version of Montauk stills a book called Notes from the Underground. Oh geez, I forget the author, Russian author. But it had me like, do a little digging into it, right? And one of the premise of that is like a collection of stories where the premise is the main character or the narrator within the novel itself or short story is trying to state that utopia has finally deemed that in order for everyone to be happy, there is no suffering, there is no pain, right? Whereas humanity actually needs that. You need to have those stumbling blocks. You need to have those moments of failure so that when you succeed, that's where you get your happiness. Case in point, I had to repair a washing machine. I never repaired a washing machine in my life, but then I studied what the issue was, did a little research online, and I was like, oh my God, it's really this simple. An hour later, with the help of my son, I had my machine working again.
Awesome.
Happiness, joy,
Yeah.
success. And guess what? I got it from reading.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's where, again, it's quite wild watching this version, of course, 2018's version, again, the parallels, because it is most folks nowadays, it is such a quick gimme, 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 give it to me now, right? Veruca Salt, I want it now. That they don't take the time to really analyze or think somewhat critically that what I'm being told or what I'm seeing is the truth, right? When you allow a society to get to that point where the government, I mean, they kept talking about it, right? The ministry, even in the 2018 version, the ministry. Recent times, we've had those come up in different countries, right? The ministry of this, the ministry of that, and then people once they started paying a little bit more attention, like Montauk, they started realizing, you know what? Not everything that you're telling me is the truth. So it's kind of refreshing to see a movie that goes back in 2018. I wish they did a better job, but then to 1966, then back to the novel, and then remembering what Ray Bradbury said, which is, I'm not trying to predict the future. I'm trying to prevent it. Here we are, folks, in today's times. Think about it this way. And you've all, if you're listening now and watching now, you've asked this question. How is it that I can say something out loud and then I do a Google search and what I just talked about shows up in my search results or as an ad?
Yeah.
Right. So think about it, right? There's a reason why, like today, most modern smartphones, you cannot remove the battery. Whereas when they first hit the market, remember they used to have the backs that you could take off, swap the battery when it went bad or add more memory. And the reason why is because they want that phone on. They're listening, right? They're trying to they call it tailoring experiences. But it was the same premise within that movie, right? People are listening. 2018, uh, yeah, the 2018 version was like, you see something, you say something. Well, we've heard that slogan before, haven't we, folks?
Yeah.
It's the same premise to which the ending of 1966. Wow, I mean, I number one, I'd love to have what's it called, eidetic memory, or what's it called? I forget the name, but
Yeah.
those folks who when they hear something, they'll always be able to
Graphic
remember.
memory.
Yeah, basically,
Yeah.
to memorize these books. But I think that's not, you know, I think that's not quite the message that some folks will take away because you met interesting characters, right? In both versions, not so much both versions of the movie, 1966. It's no, I'm the Prince Machiavelli, and oh, don't judge a book by its cover because they're it's not a great society, right? He doesn't have the finest clothing and stuff. characters from Poe, Jane Austen. These different worlds come together to form a society, right? Different ideas, different experiences, knowledge sources, knowledge bases, which is when you take the basic premise of what Bradbury is trying to put forth in the novel and in both movies is, beware the government that says trust us, we know what's best for you. Because oftentimes you're going to see that, if you haven't been through it already, that it's not necessarily so, right? Keep your mind open, to which I think, which was Montauk's pretty much basic character build, right? And message, right? Was I gotta, huh, that is a book. A couple people asked me to read it. Yeah, let me go ahead and do that. And then he started, excuse me, as you said, started reading, and then his curiosity, his mind opened a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, to the point where, as you said, the chase scene, he's sitting watching a body double of himself being chased by the authorities, going, you son bitches, this is not the truth, right? And that's the key word, the truth of what's happening. So the movie closes out, and I think, again, the opening of the movie, it's genius, really, right? You're
Yeah,
not allowed to read.
ma-
Yeah, you're not allowed to read, so we're not even going to let you read the credits on this movie that you're about to watch.
yeah,
Sit there and enjoy it. And then at the end, again, society is built upon different experiences, right? That's what we do. We learn from one another.
yeah, no, definitely.
And that's the way it should be. And again, thanks to Montauk in this version, 1966's version, he gets to join that society, right? Edgar Allan Poe, which was, one of Truffaut's heroes. 18 versions, Montauk, he perishes, right?
Yeah,
He dies for the cause. So in 1966's ending, I think is much more poignant and should resonate more with viewers that say, you know what? The movie itself wasn't great, but holy crap, what they just presented, the ideas within this book, the ideas that Bradbury put forth so long ago. Holy crap, I'm looking around now. I'm speaking, metaphorically. You should be able to sit there and go, my God, I'm looking around now, and what they talk about, what they showed in this movie, it's happening now. Holy
oh,
crap.
absolutely. Yeah,
I
no,
mean, so to that point, it was kind of a surreal experience once I got done watching it, right? Because it has been so long since I've seen this movie that when I watched it, I treated it as a first time watch, right? Really paying attention. Yeah, it's not the greatest movie. Don't get me wrong. I think that's not the point. The point was the message of Bradbury.
yeah.
And to that point, I think they were very successful in delivering that message.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think considering when you consider everything they had like working against them, like as far as the working relationship between the director and the actor, which has got to be essential when you think about everything that they had, like the fact that they were taking a script that was written in French and they were trying to translate it to English, which is people say that that's an easy thing to do, but it doesn't always translate over very well. You know what I mean? Like I said, certain words just don't translate over as well. And you're trying to not only just translate the words so that they make sense, but you're supposed to do it in a way that the dialogue sounds natural because you want it to feel like a real conversation between two real people. You know, I think even though he had final cut, there was arguments with the studio, like I was telling you about this the scene where they wanted to throw in a little extra, they want to throw in a little extra love, make
Have you seen those movies called Emmanuel? We want some of that.
yeah, we want some of that manual. We need to sell this thing. It's the '60s, man. It's time for the exploitation flicks. Get a little TNA on that poster. We might be able to get this in a couple more theaters and sell a couple more tickets. No, yeah, I think when you consider everything, definitely. Like, I'll be perfectly honest with you. I read the book in high school. I rented it from my library on VHS. And the first time I watched it, I wouldn't say disappointment was the word because I'm not gonna say I was disappointed, but I definitely felt like, man, there's this thing that I really freaking love. And then there's this, which represents what I really love and has a lot of the importance of what I love. But I wish the execution was just perhaps a tad bit smoother because I feel like if it was just a tad bit smoother, it would have knocked it out of the ballpark and I would have been absolutely in love with this film. And I still have a lot of affection for the film. I'm just not in love with the film because, like you said, there's a lot of powerful meaning and it has a lot to say. So because of that, you can't, in my opinion, you can't not have affection for the movie because the message of what it's trying to say is so important that, it's awesome. What I would
Yeah.
like to see in a perfect world probably won't happen anytime soon because we just had the 2018 version. What I'd like to see in maybe another 5 or 10 years, I'd like to see someone like, well, HBO already did this version, their 18 version, so I don't know if they would do it, but maybe one of the other studios would do like a mini series. Give me like 8 episodes, 8 to 10 episodes where you can really dive deeper into that world, but don't make it a regular series where you have 4 or 5 seasons. Just give me like 8 to 10 episodes to really kind of really give those characters, flesh them out, and really give us that world fully realized.
Yeah,
I think that would be
I would throw one a little bit different than what you proposed. I would actually propose a miniseries,
yeah, that's
right? Like
awesome.
back in the old day, but just like the book, again, I think the book is over a 3-day period, 3 episodes,
Yeah, you could do that,
right?
definitely.
A three episodes that captures each day. And I would actually take and merge the book, the 1966 version, and the 2018 all in one, right?
That's
Because I
interesting.
think it's important to know that not only, 60, the book. So, spoiler alert, if you have never read the book, please go read it. It's a great
Mhm.
story because in the book, the ending to this story is the government ends up dropping bombs to wipe out people. And to throw back to what you and I talked about with the time machine, it goes back to the question, what 3 books would you take? Hence again, 3 important books to take back to rebuild society. Whereas 1966 shows you just where it's going, where 2018 shows, holy crap, how close of a real story is it with you and your little emojis trying to talk to people, blend it all together. I think that would be an epic miniseries
Yeah, no, definitely.
to
I
on
could
the
definitely see
screen.
what you're saying. And what I'll just say as far as my closing thoughts, I found this was interesting as it's more of when I was watching a scene in the movie. It was right before they were about to burn the old lady. We have a dialogue between Beatty and Montag. And in this dialogue, we get this scene where Captain Beatty says he believes the books have nothing to say, just filling people's heads with ideas. He believes people right to different. Believes people right to be different, to stand out among the crowd and look down on others. He mentions about a book about cigarettes causing a lung cancer. He's like, well, why would you have that? That'll just get everyone worried and stressed out. So we burn it. And then we all got to be alike. That's the only way for everyone to be happy. Now that's not our main protagonist. That's our anti-antagonist. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah.
a bad guy. But just leave you with those thoughts because those thoughts just show you that crazy like mentality of him being a representative of the government and their way of thinking is we don't want you to be different. We don't want you to think. We want you to be alike because if you start thinking on your own, you're going to be unhappy. Why would you want to hear about a book about lung cancer? Then you're just going to worry about cigarette smoking leading to lung cancer. Then you're just
Yeah.
going to worry about smoking. They'd rather dumb you down and be like everybody else than let you have an independent thought. And I
Yeah.
think that is a kind of a haunting piece of dialogue. You know what I mean? And it's also a
It,
reflection of
yeah,
that
it,
totalitarian society that's what
It
they.
is. It is. Which again, I give credit to 2018. The notes from the Underground book.
Yeah.
Showing that where that message is again. No, you need some unhappiness. No, you need some failure. You need some hardships to really understand what happiness is. You want to live like a lemming. Like I said, hell, parallels to today, right? With pick a topic. You're gonna find everyone who just we know them, right? They're the sheeple regardless of what it is. Somebody says something, everyone's like, yeah. Somebody else says something, then they go, yeah. And then all of a sudden they both look at each other and go,
It's
what
like
am
even
I?
the people like I'll just real quickly and then we'll close the episode. But just real quickly, even stuff with like people not really in our groups that we're part of our mutual friends, but just in general society when it comes to films. I don't know how many people are like, oh well, I saw the Rotten Tomatoes and they got like a 30% score. And I'm like, okay, but that's those people
Right.
like see the trailer. If it grabs your attention, invest the money on either at the theater or wait till it comes on a streaming service and make up your own mind. Don't let
Exactly.
even this review here. Don't let us be the thought for you to think for you. Ultimately, you're going to go by like I said. I don't even go 100% by the review until you've seen it. But go by the trailer. If the trailer is well done and you feel like there's something crafted there, a story that's worth watching, do that and then trust your own instincts, and formulate your own thoughts but don't let someone tell you because on Rotten Tomatoes or even another review place that they didn't like it, that should be the reason that, like, oh, I don't know if I want to spend $14 because this guy, and this guy said it was crap. It
Exactly.
might be, but crap is subjective. I like films like dude, I like fucking Norbit. I get shit on that all the time. I like some people would call god awful. Fuck those people. We don't need that negativity in your life.
Yeah.
But like, I like some movies that some people might be like, hey, that's garbage. Well, yeah, maybe. But remember, your garbage might be my treasure. And I'm not saying Norbit's treasure, by the way. I'm just saying the example of, it's everything subjective.
Yeah.
So don't let anyone else, including me, formulate your own thought. But don't be afraid to formulate your own thoughts, come up with your own ideas. There
Exactly.
are so many movies that I've seen that I absolutely adore that I know are looked down upon. So many books that I've read that popular society says,
Yeah, exactly. If I wanted to be somebody else, or what I try to like tell my kids, and I tell several friends, if everyone thought the same and believed in the same thing and agreed to the same thing, what a boring freaking world we would live in.
yep.
What a completely boring world, right? Discussion, open dialogue, open mindedness creates discussion. Discussion stimulate thought. Thoughts stimulate ideas. That's where we need to be, folks.
Yep.
Not following, oh, look, those sheeple are going that way. I need to go that way too.
And don't be afraid to disagree with someone. Don't be afraid. You can do it in a way that's respectful, but don't be afraid to have a thought that's different than your friend. You could both go to the movies and he could love it and you could hate it, or vice versa. And don't be afraid to, like, hey, you're going to be like separated or you're going to
Exactly.
one out. Like, hey, listen, that's your thought, hold on to it and support your thought and make sure you have some backing to be like, hey, this is why I liked it. These are things I really enjoyed that maybe you didn't particularly enjoy. I
Exactly.
remember a quick thing before I close. When I was a teenager, for the first time, I don't know why, I was curious about a book by Miss Anne Rand called The Fountainhead. Now, I never read Atlas Shrugged or any of her other books, but I remember going to the Barnes and Nobles and picking it up, and I was just curious about it. And went to the register, and the audacity of these fucking people. Oh, that book. Like, just like that. And it's like, listen, you might absolutely fucking hate the book. I might absolutely hate the book. I don't know. At the time, I ended up loving the book, by the way, after I read it. But the nerve of you, and you're allowed to have an opinion, but when I'm giving you my money, bitch, shut the hell up and take my money.
Exactly.
I don't need your fucking opinion. Now, if we were friends and we were having coffee and you're gonna be like, that book's a piece of shit and here's why, that's different. But it goes to show you have to formulate your own opinions and you can't be afraid to think on your own feet or fail on your own feet. Like you said, it's okay to struggle. The key is you want to learn from it. You want to take something away from it. Because there are movies that I absolutely fucking hated, but I've admired for whatever reason or another. There are things throughout that I liked that I'm like, okay, this movie wasn't really that good, but there were some areas that were successful.
Yeah.
And those successful moments in that film really impacted me and they really left a mark on me. You know what I mean? And that's important too,
Yeah. And that's the whole point, right? Regardless of the medium, right? It impacts you in one way or another to stimulate that thought.
Yeah.
Does that, then it did its job.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But yeah, it's a good thing. So yeah, like you said, in wrapping up, I do have to apologize. I did miss one important thing.
No, that's okay.
Yesterday was Mr. Clint Eastwood's birthday, turned the big 9-5. Happy birthday, Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, and I hear that fucker's gonna be doing it. Give us one more movie. He's I read that he's like, yeah, I can do one more. Why not?
Yeah, and he's one that gets it, right? He's like, I did 3 sequels in my life. Don't ask me to do another sequel. I have an idea, a story that I want to tell. I'm going to tell that story.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
I mean, that's awesome. 95 years old, just to make it to 95 alone is awesome.
Exactly.
Still doing stuff. Oh man, nice. My vision's not as good as what it used to be, even with the reading glasses. I was trying to make out the images and I couldn't quite zoom in. So that's awesome, brother.
Yeah.
So before we get into our next episode, which will be hopefully in 2 weeks, we are going to be talking about, I'll announce the next 2 titles. So Mr. Korean Kool, John Nance, is going to be coming back, which I can't wait. And we're going to start that next episode, big episode 70, with a film from the 70s, guys. I don't know if you can see this that good. Okay, well, you can't see that. There we go. The light's reflecting on it. But we're going to be talking about the career of Mr. Stephen Dorff. Now, there's a guy I feel like doesn't get talked about much, or maybe as much as he used to. He's had some career hits. He's had some career misses, but he's a working man's actor. And you know what? When you look at his career, and I'm not going to talk about that too much. The guys had some really good stuff. And I told you I wanted to talk about a Stephen Dorff film. And you're like, hey, John, why don't we talk about his first film, which is The Gate? And lo and behold, we're going to talk about his very first film, a horror film from the 80s that started off his career. So I'm really looking forward to that. And we're going to follow that up 2 weeks after that. We're going to talk about a film that nobody talks about. It's from 2008. It's a horror comedy that literally like nobody talks about. And it's an insane little film called Botched. This one is a little bit harder to find. You might be able to rent it through Amazon, but if you don't mind picking up a used copy, they don't have it on Blu-ray. You can find it. I've found copies on eBay for as cheap as $4, and that includes shipping. So it is accessible. It's just a little bit harder to stream, unless you want to spend a couple bucks to stream it.
Yeah. And lucky me, I found a used copy just yesterday.
I know, dude. That's awesome. That's awesome that you were able to find it. I first, when you sent me that picture, because you sent me a picture, I just figured, oh man, you placed the order on Friday and they really shipped it quick. I just figured it was like an eBay or like an Amazon thing. I was like, well, Amazon is pretty quick, but yeah, you lucked out. So
flea markets, people, flea markets.
yeah, no, if you have a flea market nearby, check it out, or a Goodwill, or even your local library. A lot of times over time, they get rid of old material that isn't rented as much, and they also get donations. And let's face it, if you're in that collector society like us, you get that DVD, but that 4K comes out, and you got to upgrade that 4K up to that 4K. So that a lot of people will donate their old stuff. So definitely check that out. That's what we're going to be talking about. Real quick shout out for everybody. Of course, you got Troy and Brad with Not a Bomb. Each week, they take a look at films that were either a commercial or critical failure. This week was a whammy, man. They really had some balls, man, because they talked about that remake of Old Boy.
Oh, yeah.
That's not a pretty film. I mean, I love Josh Brolin and I love that Olsen chick, but that's not a pretty film. But we had two old boys talking about one Old Boy remake.
Yep.
So check out Not a Bomb, Troy and Brad every week. Like I said, great show. Of course, we got Sam and Will, the Gentleman's Guide to Midnight Cinema. Sam and Will are always bringing it, guys. Every week they are bringing us something amazing. Sometimes it's a cult classic. Sometimes it's just a regular classic. Sometimes it's a newer film. They have another group that has a wide variety of what you're getting each week. So check out Gentleman's Guide to Midnight Cinema. We have Watch Skip Plus with Jose and Mike the Wildebeest. They look at the stuff that's hitting the theaters. I believe this week they're talking about the Mission Impossible film, the newest one. And then next week, I think they're talking about Bring Her Back, the horror film that came out over the weekend. So definitely check out Jose and Mike the Wildebeest. Great show. Caliber 9 from Outer Space with Rob and Joe. These guys, group of guys, they do another amazing show. And each week they give us the drive-in format. They give us a double feature. And I forgot what they covered this week. So I apologize, Rob and Joe. I got to start writing this stuff down. But of course, I always say I'm going to do that and I always forget. But I know they have two interesting films this week because I did listen to the podcast. So check out Rob and Joe with Caliber 9 from Outer Space. And then, of course, I can't help but mention Raiders of the Podcast. Raiders of the Podcast is also another show. And they do, again, another double feature format each week. They pick two films to talk about. This week, I know they just released an episode on Marathon Man and then a movie from the 2000s, a skateboard movie called Grind. So definitely check out the boys over at Raiders of the Podcast. Another great show. So yeah, guys, that wraps up today's episode 69. Thank you for all listening. Thank you again, Mr. John Nance, for coming aboard.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, it's always a pleasure. And we'll see everybody soon. Have a great day, guys. One sec. Hold on. Bear with me. Hold on. Bear with me. There we go.